My company will belong to you if you win.
One arrogant sentence at a sun-scorched Arizona intersection bet an entire empire. A female CEO stepped out of her supercar, laughing at the black man behind the wheel of a battered old Chevy, dismissing him as someone who didn't belong in this wealthy neighborhood. Outrun me with that junk car, I'll bet $5 million on it. She believed she'd win because of money, because of status, because of prejudice. But she didn't know who the quiet man really was, or what he'd left behind to become the father his son needed. So what happens when the past returns at exactly the right moment? The Chevrolet Camaro rolled to a stop at the red light, its engine ticking in the Arizona heat. The paint had faded years ago, and rust bloomed along the wheel wells like old scars. Inside, Ethan Carter kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the gearshift. The leather was cracked and warm under his palm. He'd driven this car for more than 2 decades, and every scratch on the dashboard told a story he didn't need to say out loud. The air conditioning had stopped working 3 summers back. He'd gotten used to it. The windows stayed down, and the dry wind carried the smell of asphalt and creosote through the cabin. Ethan glanced at the clock on the dash. He had 40 minutes before he needed to pick up his son from school. Plenty of time. The light stayed red. Traffic hummed around him. To his left, a silver Porsche Taycan pulled up, sleek and silent, its paint gleaming like polished glass. The windows were tinted dark. Ethan didn't look over. He'd learned a long time ago not to pay attention to cars like that in neighborhoods like this. The driver's window slid down. A woman leaned out slightly, sunglasses perched on her head, blonde hair pulled back tight. She looked at the Camaro, then at Ethan, and her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That thing still runs?" she said. Ethan didn't answer. He kept his eyes forward. The woman laughed, light and sharp. "I'm serious. How does something like that even pass inspection?" A few people on the sidewalk turned to look. A man with a briefcase stopped walking. A woman holding a yoga mat slowed her pace. The Porsche's engine made no sound, but the woman's voice carried. "You lost?" she asked. Ethan turned his head slightly. "No. You sure? Because this isn't exactly the kind of neighborhood where people drive." "That." She gestured at the Camaro like it was something she'd found on the side of the road. The light turned green. Ethan eased off the brake, but the Porsche didn't move. The woman stayed where she was, blocking the lane, her arm draped over the window frame. "I'm Victoria Hale," she said, as if the name should mean something. "I own half the buildings on this block. So when I see someone who doesn't belong, I notice." Ethan said nothing. He shifted into first and started to roll forward, but Victoria accelerated just enough to stay beside him, matching his speed. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ethan." "Ethan." "What?" "Carter." She tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Carter. Okay. So what do you do, Ethan Carter? Besides, drive around in a car that should have been scrapped 20 years ago." "I teach kids how to drive." Victoria laughed again, louder this time. "You teach driving? In that?" "Yeah." "God, that's perfect." She glanced at the crowd that had started to gather on the corner. A few people had their phones out now, filming. Victoria's smile widened. "You know what? I like you, Ethan. You've got guts. Driving that piece of junk through Scottsdale like you own the place. That takes something." Ethan didn't respond. He kept his foot steady on the gas, eyes on the road ahead. "Tell you what," Victoria said, her voice rising just enough to make sure everyone could hear. "Let's make this interesting. You and me. A race. Right now." Ethan shook his head. "Not interested. Come on, don't be boring. One race. If you win, I'll give you $5 million. The number hung in the air. A few people on the sidewalk stopped moving entirely. Someone whispered. Ethan glanced at Victoria, but her expression didn't change. She wasn't joking. "And if you win?" Ethan asked. Victoria shrugged. "I won't. But if I do, you apologize. Publicly. And you admit that car is a piece of garbage and you don't belong here." Ethan's jaw tightened. He thought about his son waiting at school. He thought about the academy, the kids who depended on him, the bills that never stopped coming. He thought about the way Victoria was looking at him, like he was something she could buy or throw away. 5 million, Victoria repeated. Cash. Plus, if you lose, I'll fund your little driving school for the next 5 years. Full sponsorship. You'll never have to worry about money again. The crowd was growing. Phones were pointed at both of them now. Ethan could see the red recording lights blinking. Why? He asked. Because I'm bored, Victoria said. And because I want to see if you're all talk or if you've actually got something under the hood of that rust bucket. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Okay. Victoria's smile turned sharp. Good. Meet me at the access road off Pima. 10 minutes. Don't be late. She accelerated hard, the Porsche disappearing down the street in a blur of silver. Ethan stayed where he was, hands still on the wheel, the engine idling rough beneath him. He could feel the weight of the crowd's stares, the cameras still recording. He exhaled slowly and turned the wheel, heading toward the access road. The stretch of asphalt was empty when he arrived. It ran straight for nearly 2 miles, flanked by desert scrub and distant mountains. The pavement shimmered in the heat. Victoria was already there, leaning against the Porsche, arms crossed. A small crowd had followed, maybe 15 or 20 people, standing in a loose cluster near the starting line. Someone had spray-painted a white stripe across the road. Victoria pushed off the car as Ethan pulled up beside her. She walked over, tapping on his window. Ethan rolled it down. You ready? She asked. Yeah. Good. 1 pass. Whoever crosses the 2-mile mark first wins. No tricks, no excuses. She looked at the crowd, raising her voice. Everyone here is a witness. $5 million if he wins. Public apology and 5 years of funding if I win. Agreed? Ethan nodded. Agreed. Victoria stepped back, pulling out her phone. She held it up, recording. Say it again. For the record. Ethan looked directly at the camera. Agreed. 5 million if I win. You fund the academy for 5 years and apologize if you win. Perfect. Victoria lowered the phone and walked back to the Porsche. She slid into the driver's seat, and the door closed with a soft thunk. The engine purred to life, smooth and quiet. Ethan gripped the wheel. The Camaro's engine rumbled, loud and rough, the sound of old metal and older memories. He could feel the vibration through the seat, through his chest. His father had bought this car in 1972, the year Ethan was born. It had been the only thing he'd left behind when he died in 1996, broken by a system that never valued him. Someone in the crowd raised their hand, counting down. 3, 2, 1. The Porsche launched forward, tires gripping the asphalt with barely a sound. Victoria was smooth, precise, the kind of driver who'd taken a few track days and thought she knew what speed felt like. Ethan waited half a second, then dropped the clutch. The Camaro exploded forward. The rear tires screamed, and the car fishtailed slightly before the rubber caught. The engine roared, louder than anything else on the road, and Ethan shifted into second without looking at the talk. The speedometer climbed. 60, 70, 80. Victoria was ahead by 2 car lengths. The Porsche was fast, no question. All-electric torque and computer-controlled perfection. But Ethan knew this car. He knew every gear, every hesitation in the throttle, every inch of play in the steering. He'd built it with his father, rebuilt it after his father died, and driven it on tracks all over the world when no one was watching. He shifted into third. The gap closed. 1 car length, half a length. The wind screamed through the open windows, hot and dry, and the desert blurred past in shades of brown and white. Ethan's hands were steady. His breathing was steady. Everything else disappeared. At the 1-mile mark, he pulled even with Victoria. She glanced over, eyes wide behind her sunglasses. Ethan didn't look back. He shifted into fourth, and the Camaro surged ahead. The 2-mile marker came up fast. Ethan crossed it 3 seconds before Victoria. He eased off the throttle, letting the car coast, and pulled onto the shoulder. The Camaro's engine settled into a rough idle, ticking in the heat. Victoria's Porsche stopped 20 feet behind him. She sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Then she got out. Ethan stepped out of the Camaro. The crowd was running toward them, phones still raised, voices rising in a chaotic mix of cheers and shouts. Victoria walked over slowly, her expression unreadable. "That was lucky," she said. Ethan looked at her. No, it wasn't. Victoria's jaw tightened. She glanced at the crowd, then back at Ethan. "You know what? I don't think that was fair. I think you did something to your car. Modified it illegally." "It's stock," Ethan said. "Original engine. Original transmission. You can check if you want." "I don't care what it is," Victoria snapped. "This whole thing was a joke. I'm not paying you anything." One of the people in the crowd, a young man with a baseball cap, stepped forward. "We all heard you. You made a bet. On camera." Victoria turned on him. "This was just for fun. It doesn't mean anything." "You said $5 million, someone else shouted. "You said it in front of everyone." Victoria's face flushed red. She pulled out her phone and dialed. "I'm calling the police. This man is harassing me. He challenged me to an illegal street race, and now he's trying to extort money from me." Ethan didn't move. He stood beside the Camaro, hands at his sides, watching as Victoria spoke rapidly into the phone. The crowd shifted, uneasy now, the energy turning sharp. Someone was still recording. Within 5 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. 2 officers got out, one older with gray at his temples, the other younger and broad-shouldered. They walked over, and the older officer looked at Victoria first. "Ma'am, what's the problem?" Victoria pointed at Ethan. "This man forced me into a street race. Now he's threatening me." The officer turned to Ethan. "That true?" "No," Ethan said. "She challenged me. Made a bet. I won. Now she doesn't want to pay." "He's lying," Victoria said. "He's trying to scam me." The younger officer walked over to Ethan, hand resting on his belt. "Step away from the vehicle, sir." Ethan didn't move. "Why?" "Just step away from the vehicle." Ethan took 2 steps back. The officer moved closer, looking him up and down. "You have ID?" "Yeah. Let me see it." Ethan reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his license. The officer studied it, then looked at Ethan again. "Ethan Carter," the officer read aloud. "You live around here, about 10 minutes away, and you race cars for fun?" "I used to." The older officer was talking to Victoria now, nodding as she gestured emphatically. The crowd stayed where they were, silent now, watching. The young man in the baseball cap held up his phone. "I got the whole thing on video," he said. "She made the bet. She said $5 million. Everyone heard it." The older officer walked over and took the phone. He watched the video, his expression neutral. Then he handed it back and looked at Victoria. "Ma'am, this does appear to show you initiating the challenge and stating specific terms." Victoria's face went pale. "That's not legally binding. It was just talk." "Maybe," the officer said. "But it's also not harassment. If you want to pursue this, you'll need to file a civil complaint." He turned to Ethan. "You're free to go, but I'd recommend not doing this again." Ethan nodded. He took his license back and walked to the Camaro. Victoria stood frozen, staring at him as he climbed into the driver's seat. The engine turned over, rough and familiar, and Ethan pulled back onto the road. Behind him, the crowd dispersed slowly, phones still out, voices rising again. Victoria stayed where she was, alone beside her silent Porsche, watching the Camaro disappear into the heat. The video went live before Ethan made it back to his son's school. By the time he pulled into the parking lot, it had been shared 4,000 times. By the time he walked through the front doors, it was trending locally. By the time he reached the principal's office to sign Marcus out early for a dentist appointment, someone had added subtitles and a dramatic soundtrack. Ethan didn't know any of this yet. He was thinking about dinner. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat, backpack heavy with textbooks, and buckled his seatbelt without a word. He was 12, quiet in the way kids get when they're starting to notice the world doesn't always make sense. "How was school?" Ethan asked. Fine. They drove in silence for a few blocks. The Camaro's engine filled the space between them, familiar and constant. Marcus looked out the window at the passing houses, the manicured lawns, the cars parked in driveways that cost more than most people made in a year. Dad, Marcus said finally, why do we live here? Ethan glanced at him. What do you mean? I mean, everyone at school has new cars, new everything, and we have this. Marcus tapped the dashboard. I'm not complaining, I just don't get it. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. This car belonged to your grandfather. It's the only thing he left me that mattered. And we live here because the school district is good, and I want you to have opportunities I didn't. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't ask anything else. When they got home, Ethan's phone had 37 missed calls. He didn't recognize most of the numbers. There were texts, too, dozens of them, from people he hadn't spoken to in years. He scrolled through a few, frowning, then opened the first link someone had sent. The video played on a shaky vertical screen. He watched himself agree to the bet, watched Victoria's face as he crossed the finish line, watched her call the police. The comments section was already a war zone. Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding his phone. Dad, are you famous? No. Everyone's sharing a video of you racing some lady. Ethan set his phone down. It's nothing, just a misunderstanding. She said she'd give you $5 million. She's not going to. Marcus looked at his father for a long moment, then went back to his room. Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone as it buzzed again and again. He didn't answer any of the calls. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Local news picked it up first, framing it as a viral moment. Rich woman versus humble teacher. Then the larger outlets found it. By noon, someone had figured out who Ethan was. The article appeared on a motorsports blog, buried 3 pages deep in a Google search. The headline read, Mystery driver in viral video identified as former F1 champion Ethan Carter. The piece was short, written by someone who remembered. It mentioned his rookie season in 2002, the championship in 2004, the sudden retirement in 2007 that no one had fully explained. There were old photos, grainy images of a younger Ethan standing on a podium, champagne in hand, smiling at a camera he no longer looked at. Within an hour, the story shifted. The comments sections filled with people who remembered his name, people who'd watched him race, people who wanted to know why he'd disappeared. The video was shared another 20,000 times. Victoria saw it too. She was in her office on the 18th floor of a glass tower downtown when her assistant brought in a tablet. The article was open, Ethan's face staring back at her from a decade-old photograph. Is this him? The assistant asked. Victoria didn't answer. She read the article twice, her jaw tightening with each line. Then she picked up her phone and called her lawyer. Richard, I need you to fix something. The voice on the other end was calm, practiced. What happened? I made a verbal agreement with someone. It's on video. People think it's legally binding. Is it? I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. Richard Brennan had been Victoria's lawyer for 8 years. He was expensive, precise, and rarely lost. He asked her to send the video, then called back 20 minutes later. It's complicated, he said. Verbal contracts can be enforceable if there's clear intent, consideration, and witnesses. You have all 3 here, so I have to pay him $5 million? Not necessarily. We can argue it was made under duress, that it wasn't a serious offer, that the terms were ambiguous. But it's going to be a fight, and it's going to be public. Victoria looked out the window at the city below, the buildings sharp against the desert sky. Then make it go away. I'll do what I can. Victoria hung up and opened her laptop. She drafted an email to her PR team, then deleted it. She drafted another to her board, then deleted that too. Finally, she opened Twitter and typed a single message. Yesterday's incident was blown out of proportion. No formal agreement was made. I'm disappointed that someone would try to exploit a casual conversation for financial gain. She posted it and watched the replies flood in. Half supported her, half didn't. She closed the laptop and left the office early. By the end of the week, Victoria's team had launched a full counteroffensive. Richard filed a motion in civil court, claiming the bet was unenforceable due to lack of written agreement and illegal activity. Victoria gave an interview to a local news station, sitting in her pristine office, hands folded on the desk. "I have nothing against Mr. Carter," she said, voice smooth and controlled. "But I think it's clear that he's using this situation to gain attention and money. I was being friendly. I made an offhand comment, and now I'm being harassed because of it." The anchor nodded sympathetically. "So you never intended to pay him?" "Of course not. It was a joke. Anyone who watched the full video can see that. But the full video showed something else. People watched it again and again, dissecting every word, every gesture, and the more they watched, the more they saw a woman who'd made a promise she didn't want to keep." Ethan didn't respond publicly. He went to work every day at the academy, a low-slung building on the edge of town with a small parking lot and a chain-link fence around the track. The kids came in after school, mostly teenagers from families who couldn't afford private lessons. Ethan taught them how to handle a car in rain, how to recover from a skid, how to stay calm when everything felt out of control. One afternoon, a man in a suit showed up at the gate. He handed Ethan an envelope through the fence. "You've been served," the man said, then walked back to his car and drove away. Ethan opened the envelope. Inside was a cease and desist letter, signed by Richard Brennan, demanding Ethan stop making public statements about the bet and threatening legal action if he continued to harass and defame Victoria Hale. Ethan folded the letter and put it in his pocket. He hadn't made any public statements. He hadn't spoken to anyone except Marcus and a handful of reporters he'd ignored. But the letter didn't care about facts. It cared about pressure. The real blow came 2 days later. Ethan was in the office, reviewing the month's budget, when the phone rang. It was Alan Gregory, the director of the non-profit foundation that funded the academy. "Ethan, we need to talk." "About what?" Alan's voice was careful, like he was stepping around glass. "We've been getting calls from donors. Some of them are concerned about the negative attention surrounding the academy." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "What kind of negative attention?" "The video. The lawsuit. They're worried about associating with someone involved in a legal dispute. It's bad optics. I haven't done anything wrong." "I know. But perception matters. And right now the perception is that you're involved in something messy." Alan exhaled slowly. "The board voted this morning. They're suspending funding until this gets resolved." Ethan didn't say anything. The office was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of a car engine on the track outside. "How long?" Ethan asked finally. "I don't know. I'm sorry, Ethan. I really am." The call ended. Ethan sat at the desk, staring at the budget spreadsheet on the screen. The academy ran on $38,000 a month. Rent, insurance, equipment, salaries for the 2 part-time instructors. Without funding, they had maybe 6 weeks before everything shut down. He thought about the kids. Thought about Marcus, who came to the academy sometimes after school to watch the lessons. Thought about the families who couldn't afford to send their teenagers anywhere else. Then he thought about Victoria Hale, sitting in her glass tower, protected by lawyers and money and the certainty that people like her didn't lose. That night, Marcus came home from school quieter than usual. He dropped his backpack by the door and went straight to his room without saying hello. Ethan found him 20 minutes later, sitting on the bed, staring at his phone. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked. Marcus didn't look up. "Kids at school are saying stuff." "What kind of stuff?" "That you're trying to steal money from some rich lady. That you're a liar." Marcus finally met his father's eyes. "One kid said you didn't belong here. That we should go back where we came from." Ethan's chest tightened. He sat down on the edge of the bed. "What did you say?" "Nothing. What am I supposed to say?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Is it true? Are you trying to steal money?" "No." "Then why is everyone saying it?" Ethan looked at his son, at the confusion and hurt in his face, and didn't have a good answer. Because people believe what they want to believe. And sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as the story. Marcus nodded, but he didn't look convinced. The next morning, Ethan woke up to another email. This one wasn't from a lawyer. It was from a journalist named Sarah Mitchell, who worked for a national outlet that covered social issues and investigative stories. The subject line read, "Request for interview." Ethan almost deleted it. Then he read the first line. "Mr. Carter, I've been following your story, and I think there's more here than just a viral video. I'd like to talk to you about your background, your work, and the response you've received. I believe the public deserves to hear your side." Ethan stared at the screen. He thought about the academy, thought about Marcus, thought about the way Victoria had looked at him that day at the intersection, like he was something she could dismiss. He typed a reply. "Okay. When?" They met 2 days later at a coffee shop near the academy. Sarah was younger than Ethan expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes and a notebook she filled with quick, precise handwriting. She asked him about the race, about the bet, about what had happened since. Ethan answered carefully, sticking to facts, avoiding anything that felt like anger. Then Sarah asked a different question. "Why did you stop racing?" Ethan looked down at his coffee. "That's not relevant. Maybe not to the bet, but it's relevant to who you are." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You were one of the best drivers in the world. Then you disappeared. People want to know why." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the sky orange and pink. He thought about his father, about the Camaro, about the years he'd spent trying to outrun grief. "My father died in 1996, Ethan said finally. "I was racing in Europe when it happened. I didn't make it back in time to say goodbye. After that, I couldn't keep doing it. Racing felt like running away, so I stopped in 2007. Came home, started the academy. Had Marcus." He looked at Sarah. "That's the story." Sarah wrote it all down. Then she asked, "Do you know anything about Victoria Hale's family? Their history?" "No. Should I?" "Maybe." Sarah flipped through her notebook. "I did some digging. Victoria's grandfather, Thomas Hale, owned a manufacturing company in the 1960s and 70s. They made automotive parts, high-end stuff. I found some old employee records. Your father's name is in them." Ethan's hands went still. "What?" "David Carter. He worked there for 3 years as a mechanical engineer. Then he left suddenly in 1974. No severance, no references, just gone." Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. "Why?" "I'm still looking into that. But I found a lawsuit. David Carter versus Hale Manufacturing. Filed in 1975. It was dismissed." Ethan stared at her. He'd never heard his father mention the Hale name. Never heard about a lawsuit. His father had worked a dozen different jobs over the years, mostly low-paying, mostly temporary. He died broke and tired in 1996. The Camaro, the only thing of value he'd owned. "What was the lawsuit about?" Ethan asked. "I don't know yet. The records are sealed, but I'm going to find out." Sarah closed her notebook. "There's more to this story than a street race, Mr. Carter. And I think Victoria Hale knows it." Ethan drove home slowly, the city lights blurring past. When he got there, Marcus was asleep, the house dark and quiet. Ethan sat in the Camaro for a long time, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. His father had never talked about the past, never explained why they'd always struggled, why opportunities seemed to slip away just when they got close. Ethan had assumed it was just the way things were. Bad luck. Wrong place, wrong time. But maybe it wasn't luck. Maybe it was something else. Something deliberate. Ethan pulled out his phone and called Sarah. She answered on the second ring. "Find out what happened," Ethan said. "Whatever it takes. I need to know." Sarah's article went live on a Tuesday morning. The headline was simple: "The bet, the race, and the family that took everything." It started with the video, the race, the viral moment everyone had already seen. Then it peeled back layers. Sarah had found the 1975 lawsuit, buried in county archives, pages yellowed and barely legible. David Carter had sued Hale Manufacturing for wrongful termination and theft of intellectual property. The case detailed a series of engine modifications he'd designed, innovations that would later appear in patents filed under Thomas Hale's name. The lawsuit had been dismissed within 6 months. No settlement, no explanation. Sarah had also found former employees, men and women now in their 70s, who remembered David Carter. They remembered him as brilliant, quiet, someone who could look at an engine and see things others couldn't. They also remembered the day he was fired. One woman, a former secretary named Dorothy Palmer, recalled it clearly. They said he was stealing, Dorothy told Sarah in the interview. Just made up some story about parts going missing. Everyone knew it wasn't true. But Mr. Hale didn't like that David was getting attention. Didn't like that a black man was smarter than the rest of them. So they got rid of him. Made sure no one else would hire him either. The article included scanned documents, photographs of David standing in the factory, young and hopeful, alongside images of the patents filed 2 years after his dismissal. The designs were nearly identical to the ones described in the lawsuit. By noon, the story had been picked up by 6 major outlets. By evening, it was trending nationally. People who'd defended Victoria began to go quiet. The comments sections filled with anger, with questions, with demands for accountability. Victoria read the article in her office, the tablet shaking slightly in her hands. She called Richard immediately. "Did you see this?" she asked, her voice tight. "I saw it. It's defamatory. We need to sue." Richard was quiet for a moment. "Victoria, everything in that article is documented. She has sources. She has court records. She has witnesses. If we sue, we'll lose. And it'll make everything worse. So what am I supposed to do? Just let her destroy me? I think you need to consider the possibility that this isn't going away. The board is going to have questions. Your shareholders are going to have questions. You need to get ahead of this." Victoria hung up without responding. She stood at the window, looking down at the city, and felt the ground shifting beneath her. The next morning, Ethan received a call from a law firm he'd never heard of. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Linda Cross, a civil litigator who specialized in contract disputes. "Mr. Carter, I've been following your situation. I'd like to represent you pro bono." Ethan sat at the kitchen table, coffee going cold in his hand. "Why?" "Because what happened to you is wrong, and because what happened to your father is worse. I think you have a strong case, and I want to help you win it." Ethan agreed. 2 days later, Linda filed a motion to enforce the verbal contract, citing the video evidence, witness testimony, and clear intent from both parties. She also filed a separate claim on behalf of David Carter's estate, seeking damages for the theft of intellectual property and wrongful termination from Hale Manufacturing decades earlier. The case moved quickly. The video was undeniable. The witnesses were credible. And Victoria's public statements had only made things worse. Within 3 weeks, a mediator was assigned, and both parties were called to a private arbitration hearing. The hearing took place in a conference room downtown, gray carpet and fluorescent lights, and a long table separating the two sides. Victoria sat with Richard and 2 other lawyers, her face pale but composed. Ethan sat with Linda, a single folder in front of her. The mediator, a woman named Judge Helen Vasquez, reviewed the evidence methodically. She watched the video 3 times. She read the transcripts of witness statements. She examined the photos and documents Sarah had uncovered about David Carter and Hale Manufacturing. Finally, she looked at Victoria. "Miss Hale, did you or did you not offer Mr. Carter $5 million if he won the race?" Victoria glanced at Richard, who nodded slightly. "I did. But it wasn't meant to be taken seriously. Was there anything in your statement that indicated it was a joke? Did you laugh? Did you use language suggesting hypothetical intent?" "No. But did you repeat the terms clearly and publicly in front of multiple witnesses?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "Yes." Judge Vasquez turned to Ethan. "Mr. Carter, Did you understand Miss Hale's offer to be a genuine agreement? Yes. And you accepted those terms? Yes. Judge Vasquez set down her pen. Under Arizona contract law, verbal agreements can be binding if there is clear offer, acceptance, and consideration. In this case, all three elements are present. The agreement was made publicly, recorded on video, and witnessed by multiple parties. I find the contract enforceable. Richard leaned forward. Your Honor, there's also the matter of the illegal activity. The race itself violated traffic laws. Any contract formed around illegal activity is void. Judge Vasquez looked at him. Mr. Brennan, both parties engaged in the race voluntarily. Neither was coerced. And while the activity may have been illegal, the contract itself was for payment conditional on the outcome, not for the commission of the illegal act. The distinction matters. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Vasquez continued. Miss Hale, you are required to pay Mr. Carter $5 million within 30 days. Additionally, you will issue a public apology and provide full funding to Mr. Carter's driving academy for 5 years, as originally agreed. Victoria's face went white. That's not possible. I don't have $5 million in liquid assets. Then I suggest you liquidate what you need to. This is a binding decision. The hearing ended. Victoria stood quickly, her lawyers trailing behind her as she left the room without looking at Ethan. Linda gathered her papers and turned to Ethan. Congratulations, she said. Ethan didn't feel like celebrating. He felt tired. The story broke within hours. Victoria Hale had lost. The verbal contract was enforceable. $5 million. Public apology. 5 years of funding. The internet exploded with reactions. Some triumphant, some skeptical, all loud. But the real fallout came 2 days later. An emergency board meeting was called at Hale Industries. The shareholders had been watching. The public relations disaster had cost them millions in stock value. Victoria's leadership was questioned, her judgment called into doubt. 3 board members called for her resignation. Victoria fought. She argued that the media had twisted the narrative, that she'd been targeted unfairly, that the company's fundamentals were strong. But the numbers didn't lie. Partnerships were being reconsidered. Contracts were being delayed. Clients were quietly distancing themselves. By the end of the week, the board voted 7-3. Victoria was removed as CEO, effective immediately. She left the building in silence. No press conference, no final statement. Just a security guard escorting her to her car, a cardboard box of personal items in her arms. The company began restructuring immediately. An interim CEO was appointed. Damage control became the priority. And quietly, through back channels, an offer was made. Ethan received the call from Linda. They want to sell you a controlling stake in the company. 49%. Discounted rate. They're desperate to move past this, and they think bringing you in sends the right message. Ethan sat in the Camaro, parked outside the academy. Kids were running drills on the track, their laughter carrying across the asphalt. How much? $2 million. Ethan thought about it. Thought about his father. Thought about the years of struggle, the stolen designs, the life that could have been. Thought about Victoria sitting in her glass tower, certain she'd never lose. I'll do it, Ethan said. The transaction took 3 weeks. Ethan used $2 million from the settlement to buy the shares. The remaining $3 million went into a trust fund split between Marcus's education and the academy's long-term operations. When the deal closed, he became the largest individual shareholder in Hale Industries. The board offered him a seat. He declined. Instead, he installed new leadership, people who'd proven themselves ethical, who understood that power came with responsibility. The first thing the new CEO did was issue a company-wide review of hiring practices, compensation, and workplace culture. The second thing was a public donation of $5 million to organizations supporting underprivileged youth in STEM fields. The third thing was a formal apology, published on the company's website and in full-page ads in major newspapers. It acknowledged the harm done to David Carter and other employees who'd been mistreated over the decades. It committed to transparency and accountability moving forward. Ethan read it once, then closed his laptop. Victoria watched it all from a rented condo across town, her glass tower now someone else's office. She'd sold her house to cover debts, liquidated assets, downsized her life into something unrecognizable. Her phone barely rang anymore. Her social circle had evaporated. She spent her days alone, scrolling through news articles about herself, each one a reminder of how far she'd fallen. One afternoon, she drove past the academy. She didn't stop. She just slowed down, watching through the chain-link fence as Ethan stood beside the track, talking to a group of teenagers. He was smiling, relaxed, the same man she'd dismissed at the intersection months ago. Victoria kept driving. 3 months later, Ethan stood in the academy parking lot as the sun dipped below the horizon. The funding was secure. The kids were thriving. Marcus had stopped coming home quiet, stopped flinching at the mention of school. Things were better. But Ethan still drove the Camaro. Every morning, he climbed into the same cracked leather seat, turned the same worn key, and felt the same rough, idle shake through the frame. People asked him why he didn't upgrade, why he didn't buy something new with all the money he had now. He never answered. The truth was simple. The car wasn't about money. It wasn't about status. It was about memory. It was about a father who'd been broken by a system that didn't value him, who'd left behind one thing that mattered. And every time Ethan drove it, he remembered. Not just the pain, but the resilience. Not just the loss, but the fight to keep going. One evening, Marcus climbed into the passenger seat after practice, dirt on his shoes and a grin on his face. "Dad, can I learn to drive this?" Ethan looked at his son. "You sure? It's not easy. I know. But it's ours, right?" Ethan smiled. "Yeah, it's ours." They drove home together, the engine loud and familiar, the windows down, the desert air warm against their skin. Ethan thought about the intersection, the bet, the woman who'd looked at him and seen nothing worth respecting. He thought about how wrong she'd been, not because he'd won, not because he had money now or power or vindication, but because he'd always been worth respecting. He'd always been enough. The world had just needed to catch up. As they pulled into the driveway, Marcus asked, "Dad, do you think Grandpa would be proud?" Ethan turned off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy and light at the same time. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think he would." They walked inside together, the Camaro cooling in the driveway, a relic and a reminder, battered but unbroken. The story ended the way it began. At an intersection, a man in an old car, a world that underestimated him, but this time, when the light turned green, he drove forward knowing something the world had forgotten. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing isn't the car in front of you. It's the prejudice that keeps you from seeing the person behind the wheel. And sometimes, the people you dismiss are the ones who change everything. Ethan cooked dinner that night. Marcus set the table. They ate together, laughing about something small and meaningless, the kind of moment that doesn't make headlines but matters more than anything else. Outside, the Camaro sat silent under the stars, rust and all, still running, still ready, just like the man who drove it.